Hello, everybody, all a handful of you as you all trickle in. Hello, I'm going to actually set up a quick poll question while we start to wait people joining us today. Thanks so much for doing so. We have a couple of people. We'll give this a couple of minutes to begin. I see a lot of people are answering. Great participation. We'll be wanting a lot of that today, but I'll start the intros here. My name is Amanda Farina. I'm a business development rep here at Prevalent. I have the one and only Brenda Ferraro, VP of third-party risk from Prevalent as well. The girl gang is back again. If you joined us last time that we had a webinar, we had a really fun interactive one, and this one is just as important, just as exciting. It's very poll question heavy, so you guys have to pay attention. You have to participate, or else we're just going to be riffing the whole time because no one wants to talk. So even though you guys are muted and we can't see you, please participate in the poll questions. And if there's anything that you want to talk about that we aren't addressing, use the Q&A down below as well. And today we're talking about spreadsheets, right? The dreaded spreadsheet. We're really excited to talk about it. It's something that comes to us as a business development rep constantly. So I think this will be beneficial for everyone on the call. I'm going to leave it over to Brenda. Oh, one more thing, everyone. It is being recorded. So you'll get this tomorrow in your inbox if you happen to need to jump off or you want to share it. So don't fret. But again, please participate and keep your ears and eyes peeled. Brenda.
Questions. Wait, Amanda, how did they ask questions?
Oh, the Q&A down below.
Great. Because we want that throughout. So ask it whenever you want, just like we did last time.
We're gonna, yes, we're talking through it. We're not waiting till the end. So please ask as soon as you hear Brenda say something in that you want to ask about, do it and I'll answer. Ask and answer. Here we go.
All right, thanks. So you'll be popping on every so often, which is awesome. I appreciate that. And we will go ahead and get started. So once this year started, we did learn about what COVID and the pandemic is doing to us and what the ransomware attacks are doing to us and some of the events that we have been facing. And we really thought that it would be great to kind of scale back a little bit and really talk about back to basics. And back to basics for me at the first start when we started talking about this was when I was building a third-party risk program, I really felt like I was in spreadsheet jail. Everything that I did was done with spreadsheets. And of course, that was years ago. I'm not going to say how many, but it was something that caused consternation or challenges or issues with me doing any types of metric reporting, compliance reporting, sharing information. And so we're going to talk about all of those different things. And I really encourage you to, if you have questions of maybe not, you don't even have to say where you're coming from, but at least tell us that here's what I'm doing or here's what I'm facing. We'll talk about those things as well, because I really pride myself in having the ability to talk to individuals on helping them with their maturity, of getting them from one step to the next step of maturity. And that definitely is, spreadsheets have their place, but they don't have to be the main thing. So we're going to talk about all of that. Let's see what the topics are for today. So I've got that little person over there that's escaping spreadsheet jail. And in order to escape spreadsheet jail, a little bit of a tongue twister, we are going to talk about the one and dones and removing that from your program. We're also going to talk about the fatigue. So not only vendors are facing the fatigue of filling out questionnaires externally for us, the internal organizations might also be receiving questionnaires. So for example, if you're a vendor of a company, but you also have vendors. So there's fatigue on both sides. It's not just for the vendors, it's for us and them. We're also going to talk about determining what data is important or relevant for due diligence. I'm finding as I am talking to companies, they're using one questionnaire with the same questions every time, no matter what tier, no matter what profile, no matter what information classification or category. And that's going to be what's causing some of the fatigue. And we'll talk about removing that. Also, there is mapping capabilities. Once you get away from just using Excel spreadsheets and using a portal and a platform, there is the ability to map and do machine learning on the content that you gather, whether it's a document, whether it's a connection between a spreadsheet that was uploaded into the portal or filled out in the portal, and then what that content is by a linkage with every other thing that's going on in your management database. And then also reporting strategies, because you cannot measure what you do not, cannot manage what you do not measure. And so with that, we have to make sure that we're giving you the right types of reporting capabilities in order to know how to absorb that content and how much easier it is when you remove yourself from just using spreadsheets. So do we have any questions yet?
So we do sort of. Oh, just kidding. No, we don't. But we have a poll question.
We have a poll.
Here we go, people. I'm launching it right now. And it looks like for this poll question, we have your company, vendors, suppliers, and outsourcers are assessed using the following methodology. At least annually, both annual and some are every other year or more. Threat intelligence reports and alerts drive assessment schedules. Assessments are continuously evaluated based on risk mitigation. And we are just starting our program. There's no wrong answer here. A for effort for everybody, but please participate. Looks like it's a tight, close tie between at least annually and both annual and some are every other year or more. Brenda, I don't know if you see that on your end, but that's what I'm seeing now.
So I'm going to rely on your eyes.
Okay, so I'm telling the truth, everybody. I will be sharing the answers in just a second. I want to give it about another 30 seconds or so. I have almost everyone voting. Continue on. We got this. Just click your answer. And also they're anonymous, so I can't see who's answering this. So don't sweat it if you don't know what's going on. Just
it'll be good to see the pulse.
Yeah, for sure. All right, here we go. I'm going to end it. It looks like there's no other activity. And share results.
Wow.
There we go.
All right, so that's interesting. Leave that up there for a minute, Amanda. I think that what I'm finding with these responses from the participants today is that one thing that we really need to look at is threat intelligence reports and alerts to drive assessment schedules. Now, whether you're using a spreadsheet or not for your questionnaires, there is a lot of companies that will use threat intelligence for their RFP process as part of their segmentation scoring. They'll also use it to find out what the heavy lift will be in order if they had 5 vendors that they were challenging against each other for bid. And then you can see how heavy lift the security posture is going to be for your company. The other thing is when an alert happens, sometimes you need to throw that vendor back into the reassessment phase because obviously they've had an event or an incident. And so you're going to want to reassess them to make sure that all of their controls are tucked in tightly. At least annually and the both annual and some are every other year or more. What I would recommend for that is we're starting to go to a continuous evaluation type of program. And it looks like there's 13% of you that answered that are doing that. And what that means is that you do an assessment and you identify risks. And for those vendors that have risks, or for even yourself that's doing a self-assessment, if you have risks that are identified, as you mitigate them in real time, your score is changing and you're notifying your clients or your vendors that those particular items are remediated. And then you can go through validation phases. And then there's about 16% of you that are just starting your program. So welcome to the party. It is really fun. I love third-party risk management. Not everybody does. But we'll at least get you some information going through this presentation. So you can plop that back into the history. I think I can close it myself.
You got it.
There
All right, well, before we move forward, Brenda, we have a couple of questions. First one is, did you participate in the recent FDIC RFI on third-party assessments?
FDIC RFI third-party assessments. I'm not sure. We would have to ask our CISO. We have a CISO at Prevalent, and we'll have to confirm that. So Amanda, if you want to take a note, we can get some information back to them.
Doing it right now. We'll get back to you on that and we will reach out directly. Second one is, I've heard about many GRC tools that have modules that address TPRM, but they are expensive. Are there other alternatives that you are aware of?
Ours. So yes. I mean, we wouldn't say that we are a complete full G3 GRC, but we are complementary. So if there's modules within all of these different GRCs that you have already embedded into your company, we work very nicely with them. So we're working with Ariba, we're working with ServiceNow, we've got some other ones that we're working with. So if you find that, number one, they're not giving you everything that you need and you want something that's complementary, then you can always come to Prevalent or portals that can help you with that type of a scenario. Any other questions, Amanda?
That's it for now.
All right, then we will move on. Okay, moving on to the next topic. So what we know, we have challenges and we know what we need. And this is basically talking about, I had an interview with one of our potential customers, basically talking about where they are with their program. And I'm not going to say who it is because that's confidential, but they are in the process of using spreadsheets right now. They're just actually creating a spreadsheet. They had a Big Four that was coming to help them get their policy and their procedures and processes all outlined. They were talking about how they were going to triage and or classify their vendors, what tiers were going to mean, where the thresholds were set. They do use a threat intelligence. But I asked, what are your challenges with going through what you have received as guidance? And what are you going to do next about that? And how can I help you to mature your program without having you drink from the fire hose? And so some of the things that they had mentioned was request management was a challenge. They're getting requests through email. And when you use email, of course, you can pretty much realize that using email outside of information request management solution, or maybe even a form, a request form, that all of these requests start to become singularly in nature. And so it's hard to see how many do you have, what are you doing about them, how long have they been waiting, and all of that type of stuff. So also with regards to request management, you want to make sure that as you're getting a request, so that you know what type of due diligence to apply, whether it's your one single questionnaire or a questionnaire that's flexible or using threat intelligence, you need to understand critical information, like what region are they working in, or some people use volume of how much are you spending with them. I've had issues with using that, but some companies do, and they find that it works out well for them. But anyway, request management needs to be in a systematic approach. We have a question, Amanda.
Quick question here. Do we need to develop or have a TPRM process knowledge in parentheses before considering automation and in parentheses eGRC system?
No, you really don't, because wherever you are in your maturity, we can help you get even more mature, or any program that you build can incorporate those different parameters. Just use a roadmap that is bite-sized chunks of how you're going to mature, and make sure that they're feeding off of each other as you grow within your company. Any other questions, or should I move on?
You can move on for now. Thank you.
All right. So some other things that they talked about was, I have no way of doing reporting because everything that I do is in email. I'm capturing my spreadsheets in email. I'm capturing my documents in email. I am capturing the requests in email. And so of course you can understand that that can get unruly. And then of course, they're probably creating a spreadsheet to track everything. So here we go again with having an Excel spreadsheet. Evidence and document management, basically, with regards to document management, you should have some scenario where when you're gathering content in a portal or using an Excel spreadsheet, which we're trying to get you out of, you ask for evidence, because a lot of companies will say, yes, I have incident response management in place, but how will you know how well they have incident response management in place? And how will you prove that they've even got a policy. So evidence and documents are also important. And inside your portal, you're going to want to make sure that you have an expiration date of when that content in that document or certification is going to expire, because there needs to be a workflow that will remind your vendor without you having to lift a finger that says, hey, guess what? We reviewed your document last year. We have to have everything at least less than a year old or up to a year old. And it's time for you to refresh that content for us so that we can make sure that either one, if it was a risk, you have mitigated it. And two, if there's other threat landscapes that have to be involved, included in that document that you have. So for example, all of your SOC 2 documents that you probably have in your systems today or in your portfolios don't take into consideration work from home environments, or maybe they do, but it's at a limited capacity, unless in the past year you've had that updated. So make sure that they're looking at the different techniques and fundamentals of how we're working in the environment in the ecosystem today. The other thing is binary responses. So we all know that the spreadsheets, majority of the time, not always, but majority of the time, have a yes, no answer, parent-child question, give me a document maybe, might have some blanks. So as I was talking with this particular potential client, I was letting them know that you have to have mandatory fields, because if you have something that's not mandatory and it comes back blank, then you're going to have to spend time getting on the phone, going and asking them what is your answer? Did you not understand the question? How can we help you? And it just makes more work for you. And it also will make it so that you can't move on to the next assessment and do your risk management quite rapidly. The process can be overwhelming. And what that really is talking about is that if you have a threat intelligence tool and you have your Excel documents that are happening in email, or you're doing workflows that aren't automated, there's things that can be done in order to get you out of just using Excel and putting you into a position of being in a driver's seat that has more scale capabilities, and then also can gather the content that will be shareable across different types of views. So what I mean by that is the next thing that we're going to talk about, information sharing and storage. So if I fill out a questionnaire, that questionnaire should be mapped to regulatory compliance, so that if I have a person, maybe Amanda, who is in privacy, she would be able to look at the content in her lens. It would bring up the questions that pertain to privacy, so that I would be looking at it from an IT cyber perspective, probably. And then she could be looking at it from a privacy perspective, and we could be working in tandem on mitigating risks that are important to us. So that's one thing that you want to think about as well. Now there's the multiple disjointed tools. We talked about that already. If you have 3 different or 4 different tools that you're working together that don't feed information to each other, and you don't have one hub to look at all of the information, then it does become unruly, where you have to go and say, okay, I've got this content over here that's maybe threat intelligence, and I have this content over here, which is maybe the responses from a questionnaire, and I have no way to tell if what they're saying is actually what this is showing. So that information has to marry together so that you can normalize the risk to say, okay, they responded this way, the outside in look looks like this, and actually they have an issue or they don't, based on what they answered and what we see. Risk management, of course, if you start to identify risks within a spreadsheet, you have to have some way to embed the risk scoring. You also have to be able to show reporting out of those documents, not just by entity or vendor or supplier or outsourcer, but by portfolios that may lead up to a department or a VP. And then, of course, excuse me, questionnaire fatigue. So I remember getting some mentions from the counterpart department that was working in security with me at one time. And they said, we have over 100 questionnaires to complete. And I'm like, well, I am collecting 3,000 vendor questionnaires. So there's so much out there that we want to hone in on. So Amanda. It looks like we have a
No
question.
questions. All right, here we go. Is there value to separating reviews of the third party as a company and organization from the services they provide?
Yes. And the reason for that is because some services need to provide information to you about certain controls. Let's talk about software development lifecycle. So software development lifecycle has a couple more components that may or may not be in your master spreadsheet questionnaire or in your portal questionnaire. If they want to also look at defect management and static and dynamic code scan reports. It's not just all about the pen test. So you can take that as an example and you can modify it so that while you're looking at the information that you collect, that it's flexible enough to pull in the parts that are important and then identify the key controls that are most critical for that service type. So the answer is yes, long-winded before that, but yes.
Well, I have a long-winded question.
Okay, I'll try to piece and part it together.
Yeah, here we go. A lot of the information exchanges appear to be of the self-reported variety. These are inherently subject to inadvertent and unintentional error, and in some cases, by clear exception, subject to purposeful misrepresentation. Also, just because something is asserted via written document, in parentheses, procedure, process, or systematic tools, does not necessarily mean that it is being properly deployed, managed, or reliably followed. How does Prevalent validate what companies self-report?
All right. So
did you write all that down?
Yeah, I did. Exchange self-reported errors, purposeful virtual validation. I think I got it. So I'm going to start from the bottom up. So what Prevalent does to validate is we have a risk operations center and we will have manuals and playbooks for the customers that say, here are my most critical information, or if they don't have it, we can get that for them based on the risks that are identified when the responses come back. Now we go through and do a verification exercise to make sure that the documents are accurate and relevant to the question. So there is an exercise that happens from a verification perspective, but also from a validation point of view, all of us have been kind of sitting our on-site visits on our shelf. We now have the ability to do virtual assessments for the risks that are identified and doing testing protocol with the vendor. So we send the vendor the information that we're going to be looking at. We schedule a meeting with them. We validate. We do, like, maybe it's a Zoom meeting. We look at information with a GoPro on their head, whatever it is we decide to do, that we need to see the facilities or if we need to look at documents. And then that way we can validate that the items are actually effective and enforced. And that way we can go ahead and go through the virtual assessment portion for validation.
I have a question actually to kind of bounce off of that, just speaking from experience of having a conversation with who asked this question. What if, putting your fingers over a keyboard, having that as being your answer to a question, like what is popping up like that is BS, so to speak, to show like the questions that are being answered in the questionnaire? Like, how are we validating it? Like, that's legit, or that is someone just trying to fill it out and getting it over with, kind of thing.
Well, it's really easy when everybody says yes to everything, because that's a red flag.
Like, you're perfect.
But the other thing is that if you bump up the information to your threat intelligence, that's going to help as well. So you can see if the outside in and the inside out matches. So if they say they're doing something and then the threat intelligence says, nope, sorry, we're finding that you're not, then that becomes a risk. The other thing is that we've got all of the mapping done for NIST and ISO and CCPA and GDPR. And so if there's responses that come in, we can also check to make sure that the responses are reflecting appropriately in the regulatory requirements. Now, not only that, there's a process that you can use depending on the tiers. So for all your tier ones, you should be doing virtual assessments if you're not doing on-sites for those select ones. And then for anything that's high, medium, and low, then you're going to have to determine which ones you have the time, or if you want to staff augment with someone like Prevalent to help you get that done. But we basically, it's scary because we're trying to get to a no trust approach, but we have to trust. And what's going to happen is as alerts come up for breaches, you'll find out, of course, reactively that something is not going right. But proactively, if you're reviewing their documents, if you're looking at their responses and you're multiplying that and harmonizing it with your threat intel, pretty much is going to be an easy way to find out if something's wrong or not. And sometimes within the portal, the questionnaires will have trick questions. So if you answer one way on one section and you answer one way on another, then that way you'll end up finding out, oh, wait a minute, if it's answered here, but it's not there, what are they doing?
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful.
So it's called risk association. You got
that. There's one more question here. It says objective evidence. Is that a component of your threat intelligence here at Prevalent?
So our threat intelligence has evidence that has been strictly gone through. So if you say objective evidence, we've got what we find in the open source. We also have links to information that you need to see. There's the cybersecurity, the business security, and the financial security. So if you're talking about the fact that you want information at your fingertips based on historical, cleaned up, not cleaned up, we give it all to you just like every other threat intelligence does. But we have a way of making sure that if something comes in and we recognize that it doesn't look accurate, then we are communicating with our partner companies that we're using, and we also communicate with our internal organization to say, okay, we need to review this and make sure that this is extremely accurate so that that's what you're getting at your fingertips.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's all for now. I'm gonna.
All right, I'm gonna put my pen away and we're gonna go on.
Yeah.
We're gonna change from this slide at some point, I promise. All right, so what is needed? We talked a little bit about consistent and contextual response format with impact ratings. So that really, in all essence, is making sure that you are getting information that you can repurpose every year, because the security controls normally are going to pretty much stay the same outside of they may tweak up in risk, or they may tweak down in risk, or we might add a couple things based on what we experienced last year. Of course, we've got a couple other items that have raised up in the risk posture. But also the impact ratings have to be very flexible so that you can change them on a dime. For example, if I think that encryption is the highest risk, and this would never go down, by the way, in risk posture. But if I needed to switch that to a high instead of a critical, I can really quickly do that, and it would span across all of my vendors so that they would be able to know that their risk has changed, and it's not something that I necessarily want them to focus on as much as the criticals, or maybe they would focus on it still. It just depends on what your policy has identified. Now for the response format, basically this contextual response makes it easier for us to, for example, in the future, there will be a way where words will be identified, and the words from a document to the words of the responses in the questions will then also be able to be identified along with the threat intel. So we're continuously being in a position where we're trying to make you proactive and find out things rapidly. Now, the data capture and the interpretation, what happens when you use spreadsheets, if it doesn't have the ability to grow into the next year, then you're going to be pressing upon your vendors and or even yourself, if you're having to fill out questionnaires, the necessity to fill it out all over again. So make sure that the data is consistent and it's able to cross and flow through laterally and objectively to everywhere that you need it to for machine learning. The scale, of course, if you're using spreadsheets and you're going through all of them, some portals, because if you're not using just a spreadsheet that flags or identifies high, medium, and low, the portal will be able to say, here's the flagged items, go look at those, make a risk if you need to, or close the flag. And then also, if you have anything that is a risk that is of high or critical, and this year that's all you're going to attend to until you get all your vendors uploaded into the system, then that way you can make sure that you're looking at what's right and what's most important. Doesn't mean that mediums and lows go away. Doesn't mean that they're not as important, but sometimes you have to have a place to start. Amanda.
One quick question for our Canadian fans on this call here. We want to make sure that they know that our solution does align with Canadian regulations and legislation. True or false?
I believe it's true because we are housed in Canada.
Yeah. We are.
So
work to do.
Yeah, no, I believe it's true. We're looking at all different locations. It's not just Canada, it's also the UK, it's also the Europe, all Asia, all kinds of things. So we're looking at all of them, and if we have it, we have it. If we don't, it's about to be implemented. So Amanda, you might want to write that down and just make sure that you get the accurate answer to them that it is, because in my opinion, we are.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, continue on.
All right, so information storage and linkage, we talked about that already. And then audit trail for accountability. So when an auditor comes in and wants to see where you are with your program, you want to make it very easy for them, not go to your email accounts and look up all the spreadsheets and then say, here's what we did, and create reports for them. You can have a portal and a process that you could say, okay, we're going to give you roles and access with visibility to certain things, and you can go and look into our platform and see exactly what's happening so that they can see real time what's going on versus you having to send out reports. All right, I think it's time for one more slide, and then we're going to get into another polling question because I don't want you to fall asleep out there. So how do I break away from the one and done assessment methodology? Because I feel like I can't keep up with the volume. I can't identify the relevant content. I need to streamline the assessment review process. And we talked about all of that in the previous slide. But I think the one thing that's really important on this one is just to say, your questionnaires need to stay static to a point, and they're not going to go away. We just want to get you from the spreadsheet and the email process over into a platform or a process that's going to make it easier for you to use what you get and continue using that over and over and over again unless there's a change. It's kind of like when you get a driver's license, you take the test and you go and you drive. You don't really necessarily have to go get another driver's license until you're, well, in Arizona, one time I think it was 40 years later, but at some point you're going to have to go retake the test. We want to get it to a point where it's continuous evaluation. So if there are risks, the risks are being tracked from the responses and from the threat intelligence, and that you're mitigating those. Identifying relevant content is when you use packages or sections of a questionnaire that is relevant to the service, relevant to the tier, relevant to the category. So that's making it so that it's flexible, so that, say, for example, I was a business and I was working for your company, and I completed your assessment information, and you collected all my content, and I was categorized or tiered as a medium type of company. But then I got very successful. And so I decided I was going to increase my services, and I wanted to do some more things with you that would handle host, processor, store, sensitive, or restricted data. Now that immediately would be something that you would need to say, okay, well, we've got your assessment from the perspective of the business that you were providing before. Are any of those policies different? And if not, let's reuse that information. But we also need to know about all of this now, because you are elevating your risk posture with us by partnering with us to do that type of a service as well. So that way you can have different types of service packages for me as a company. So for example, Microsoft, you probably have a bunch of them down there, and how they're being used by what department. And that's one thing that you can't do with just a simple spreadsheet. Amanda.
All right, one question prior to our next poll one. I have, apart from TPRM, does the solution enable an organization to manage a central repository of all third-party contracts with appropriate fields and enable search, alerts, and reporting?
Yes. So we do have the ability to do all of that. So I would, Amanda's probably the person, or maybe Amy, that you would reach out to, and those two and some others of our staff would be able to show you exactly how that works. But yes, we do have the ability to do that.
Yepper. Okay, well, you ready to change off to the next slide there?
I am ready to go to poll number 2.
All right, here we go. I'm about to launch right here. And for this question, we're going to ask you each questionnaire for you, or survey or assessment request. How long does it take to complete for you? Less than an hour, but not more than a day? More than a day, but less than a week? More than a week, but less than 2 weeks? More than 2 weeks, but less than 4? Or more than 3 weeks to infinity and beyond?
And really what this is all about is I'm now switching it over to you as a company are a vendor to someone else, and you have to fill out questionnaires. So if you don't know that answer, put in the answer for how long does it normally take one of your vendors to complete an assessment. And we'll just take that as a by question.
That's interesting. Looks like it's kind of changing now that you said this. It still looks like the lead is more than a day, but less than a week at 32%. I'm going to give it another 15 seconds or so. I have a little more than half of you guys attendees answering, but where's the rest of you? Hello? In there? Unmute me. Answer the question. Okay, I'm going to end it now. Here we go. And we'll share the results. And it looks like it's stuck to that 32%, more than a day, but less than a week.
Okay, well, that's really good because my experience when I was filling out questionnaires, of course, it was the longer questionnaire of 1,000+ questions. It normally would take a vendor over 30 to 60 days to complete. So this is really, really good news. If it's taking you less than a week to complete it, that means that potentially they are asking relevant questions of you. So that's really excellent. The ones that are more than 3 weeks, the 23% of you, I feel for you. I want to help you. Let us know how we can help, because it should not take more than 3 weeks to complete an assessment. If it is a brand new company, it can take a little bit longer, but most of the time it's less than 2 weeks so that you can get your responses back and start your verification process. All right, interesting stuff. Now, if we go into our next topic, this is all about reducing questionnaire fatigue. So there's a couple things that I want you to think about when we reduce questionnaire fatigue. Having a standardized questionnaire that's flexible, that's number one. And then mapping that questionnaire and information to other content, whether it be threat intelligence or whether it be information that you're going to be using for mapping. So for example, you might be using the SIG 2021 questionnaire. And then you might decide, oh, you know what? I also want to use the Prevalent Control Framework questionnaire. So you have to see what your key controls are and make those mappings so that when you're identifying risks, it's kind of like a like-for-like assessment. However, the SIG might have a lot of other information that you may or may not need, whereas the PCF may have what you're looking for. So that's one thing. The other thing is associating risks. So say, for example, I send out a questionnaire to someone and it's the SIG Lite, and the SIG Lite has all these different sections and they're answering information in different sections, and some of them aren't coming out as clear or correct as the other ones, or they're like a mismatch. I wouldn't say correct or incorrect, it'd be a mismatch. Then you want to use the risk associations to just show you on a screen that says, hey, by the way, this answer also associates to all these different risks that are identified and or not identified, or responses that were given, so that you can kind of look at it from a full picture instead of have to look up, okay, this one matches with this section of this question of this parent of this child. Makes it much easier. Participating in a network, exchange, or a marketplace. So when you do participate in a network or an exchange or marketplace, it means that you're going to be using content that's readily available that can be shared with other companies. So I have always advocated that if I'm a vendor, I'm going to participate in a network because I want to be able to, whatever industry has access to that network, whether it be the healthcare or the legal, I want to be able to say, yes, this information with my permission, once you ask me, can be shared with company A, company B, and company C, because I have completed my questionnaire to the services that I provide, whether it's one or the other. But if the service engagement is different, then ask me to fill out that information as well, and I'd be happy to do so, store that up in the network, and it's available for the next person who comes along. That way, I'm only filling it out once, and I'm doing my risk mitigation at one time for those responses that will apply to every customer that I work with. The exchange is the same way, and then the marketplace does a little bit extra. The marketplace is going to have it so that you have the ability to look at what documents, what items do you have stored, whether it's just one type of standard that's for one particular network, or if it's a couple. For example, I might fill out a SIG Lite, I might fill out a HISAT questionnaire, I might fill out a PCF, I might store my SOC 2 documents. If it's shareable and I have a bridge contract or letter, I might put my any other certification document that I have, or a pen test with permissions included. And that will be up there so that if a customer comes along, they say, I want the SIG, I want the pen test, but I don't need to see anything else. And then that way they can reflect the risks on their side. And then automating the responses, making sure that as responses come in, they not only say it's a risk, but if there is a risk, there's a risk recommendation applied so that you don't have your team of staff or your contractors or your staff augmentation saying different risk remediation techniques. They'll have timelines. It will say, for this particular risk, we expect you to do X, Y, and Z in this amount of time. And by the way, we will check in with you to make sure that it's done, or we'll run a report that says it's overdue. And what that will do is if it's overdue, then the risk remains and you have to escalate. And if it is mitigated, then you go through the verification process. You don't want to just accept a risk has been mitigated without checking it. Please make sure you do that. And then actionable data. Having the ability to slice and dice content that you're gathering from a survey that's in a portal is going to give you the ability to look into more and more information and risk database decisions. All right, so poll question number 3.
Here we go. Let's go back to here. All right, launching poll, everyone, eyes and ears peeled here. Our third-party risk management program uses questionnaires that are static, each vendor receives the same questionnaire, flexible, whereas questionnaires are relevant to vendor engagements, or we don't have questionnaire selected yet. And also, again, reminder, anonymous. Don't sweat it. Be honest. I have a little more than half of you. Looks like we're actually paying attention. This is great news. I'm going to give it a couple of more seconds so we can get a little bit more of a higher percent of voters. But these will be helpful. Looks like in the big lead here is flexible, whereas questionnaires are relevant to vendor engagements. And that is what we want to see. That's impressive. And looks like it's not really moving too much. Give it a couple more seconds here. Lock in those votes.
That's a TV show phrase.
Title yesterday, so I feel like it's in the beginning phase where it's only the good part where you just like see the people if they're like really good or not. It just reminded me of that. I'm a sucker for those types of shows. All right, looks like everyone stopped doing it because I started talking about American Idol, which is fun. All right, sharing results.
Oh, good. So over half of you have flexible, which is great. So static is good, but flexible is better. So that's good. And then for the 11%, there's 11% of you that are working on getting a questionnaire together. So we can help you there. All right.
I have a question to bounce off of this. I mean, it depends on even vendor count, right? I mean, if they had only a handful of vendors, is static terrible? Or
no,
is it a good option?
So say, for example, there's only 20, use the same questionnaire.
Right.
But once you get up into the hundreds or more, then you need to really start thinking about the flexible questionnaire, because you will start receiving vendors that will come back, or suppliers that say, I can't answer these questions. It's not even applicable. Why are you having me do it? There's another, a lot of companies are starting to do like brokers or consultants that have laptops. So they're going out and past and beyond just the cybersecurity type scenarios. And so when that happens, you're definitely going to want to take a look at what you're asking and make sure that it's relevant.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. Okay.
All right. So speaking of relevant content, the trust and verify and the validate is very important. So your standard questionnaire, whether it be flexible or static, your threat intelligence are the trust and verify. And then the virtual assessment that we talked about earlier is the validate. And you can use the content that's based off of what you receive in the trust and verify to scope your validation process. Now, once you've identified your questionnaire standard, whether it be static or flexible, hopefully flexible, then of course you're going to want to make sure that you have a classification model to say, here is what is going to fall into what tier. Engage other departments, talk to your procurement, talk to your privacy departments, because the information that you're gathering can also coincide with what they need to know, so that they also aren't asking the same similar questions in some cases. There's always an overlap when every department's reaching out to a vendor and asking them certain things. Try to collapse that into you're asking for the company and share that with those departments. The other thing is, of course, profiling and tiering, categorizing the vendors. That is one of the most important things in order to know that you're doing the proper due diligence, number one, and number two, that you're putting them in the position of making sure that you're looking at the risks the appropriate way. The criteria for that you use to select in order to have relevant questionnaire content can be quickly built. It basically means that if you have certain types of services, you take what information you're gathering and you determine what are the key controls across all of them, or across just your high and critical, and then what are the informations that what needs to be informational versus what's actionable. And then correlating the questionnaire responses with your threat intel is going to be by far one of your best opportunities to know what you're trusting from the vendor is actually what you're seeing in the wild. And that will help you to determine on a percentage. It's about a 67 to a 70% crossover of what is trust and verify. And we go to a question.
Oh, it's my own question.
Oh, okay.
Curious, Brenda. Do we have anything at Prevalent that helps correlate questionnaire responses and threat intelligence?
Oh yeah, we do it already. So nice little plug in there, Miss Amanda.
All right, carry on.
Not only that, we also can use information from companies like BitSite and others, so that we're already pulling in some of their feeds with APIs. So if you already use BitSite, then we can use that information, or you can use our threat intel as well. Now, normalizing the risk becomes that one thing where you can see a holistic picture based on all of the information that you're pulling in. And then the critical vendors, of course, would be scoped, and then you would perform the virtual assessment. So basically what would happen, let me walk you through the process. So if you are taking a drink or having a bite for food or whatever time of day it is for you, this is good. So I filled out my questionnaire that you sent to me. It's relevant to our engagement. And I gave you my responses and I gave you some evidence. And you've run a threat intelligence report or some type of threat intelligence report. And the information is mapped together. And that now is showing you what my risks are in true fashion, whether I responded and it came up in the threat intelligence that they didn't match, or whether it did. Now I know exactly what the critical and high risks are. And those critical and high risks are then going to become the scope where Prevalent's going to come to you and come to me actually and say, okay, I want you to validate and do an effective and enforced type of assessment that's going to show me exactly how are you performing this program? What are the audit capabilities? What are the protocols that you use for a testing process every year? What are your logs if you need to look at logs? And then that way, when you identify if it is enforced or not, within that same platform, what's going to happen is it's going to take that risk and it's going to mitigate if it is a risk, or it's going to remove it if it's not a risk. Say they're doing it great and it was showing up as a risk, then you're going to reduce the risk, or you're going to actually remove it based on your testing protocol results. So that's the holistic picture for those critical vendors. Now, repurposing the previous responses and adopting continuous evaluation then goes into effect. So next year, you're going to say, okay, Brenda, we're going to take your responses, and we've actually updated our questionnaire. We've got some other controls that we need to know about. We're going to repurpose what you have. You're going to need to go through and just make sure that all of those are still accurate and correct. And then the other ones that are open and not answered yet, please go and open those and answer them and give evidence where needed. And if there's any risks, of course, throughout the real time, if a risk comes in mitigated, cross my fingers that you all are thinking about doing this, you go and you verify that the risk has been mitigated to your expectations. You can reduce the risk so that you know that it's been mitigated, but don't remove the risk until you know that the risk is actually gone. So it would go from a high risk to maybe a medium risk to maybe stay at a medium risk if they still have work to do, or after your verification, or they will go to it's not a risk anymore. They've mitigated it completely to our satisfaction. We're good. So that's all fun stuff. And polling question number 4.
All right, I have to laugh because we put a typo. So it looks like we wanted to say your company, but we wrote door company.
Aww.
Sorry. Your company map inside out assessment responses to outside in threat intelligence for holistic picture of risk, yes or no?
So basically what that's meaning is, do you take your responses and your threat intelligence and harmonize those together or normalize those together?
Kind of like my shameless plug.
And do your is what I do all the time. I combine letters and words. So many times I get tongue-tied and I will put 2 words together all the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, I barely can speak majority of the time I talk to anybody. So.
This is just an efficiency word.
Yeah.
How does it look, Amanda?
All right, well, it looks like it's pretty tight, but it looks like no is the consensus here. We have a little more than half of you guys participating. Like Brenda said, take a bite of food, take a drink of water, but like one hand on the keyboard, just a simple click of the mouse. And we'll give it one more second here. And I'm going to end that poll. And here we go.
All right. So it's pretty no's expected. Mm-hmm. Yeses, bravo. Yeah. That is really, really good. So I'm excited for those that have yeses, and then those for no's. It's good to get there, and there's ways that you can. There's opportunities. All right.
Someone just asked, what if we don't know?
Oh yeah, there should have been a question response for, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So we failed on that question with door and not another.
Yeah. Okay. That question we could have improved on.
Yeah.
Duly noted, feedback taken. All right. So mapping assessments to real business threats. When we have impacts, and if you're using Excel spreadsheets, it's really hard for you to go back and say, okay, here's the vendors that are having issues or are impacted by this particular threat. And when you're using a portal, it needs to get you to the point where it's going to say, here are all of your vendors that have been impacted by this particular incident. I try not to say the one that we just experienced because it's a little bit over. They talk about it all the time. But if it was something that was an incident that made us get a federal situation where they send out a directive, then that's important. We need to find out who's impacted by it. So everything needs to be data driven. You have to have those spreadsheet of content or surveys or all the information into one place. Make sure it's contextual, because sooner rather than later in the future, things are going to start being matched up by words and keywords versus serial numbers or things like that, so that you're able to use machine and artificial intelligence learning to determine where your risks are. And the monitoring is really important, because this monitoring perspective is going to give you the ability to know that something is happening. Now, there are proactive ways and there are reactive ways. And sometimes the threat intelligence has to be cleaned up. For example, I talk about this all the time. When I started using threat intelligence for a company, I drank my own champagne. Sometimes I say eat my own caviar. I try not to say eat my own dog food, because I love dogs. So we ran the report on ourselves, and then we took the time to make sure that what was in that report was accurate. I highly recommend that when you run threat intelligence reports on your vendors, you share that information with them. It's kind of like taking a test and getting your responses, so that you can go and make sure that you're removing or fixing things that need to be fixed. So not only with your surveys that you ask, you can run a risk summary report that says, here's the things that I want you to remediate. And as well, here is your threat intelligence report that we ran on you, if you ran one, and why it's showing up that there are some risks. And set thresholds. There are definitely thresholds that you can set, whether it's bit site, where anything that's a individual security area that has an F or a D, you might want to do those, or an overall risk score that has a leveraged on a certain number or parameter. Now, prioritizing those risks are important too, because you're going to get a lot of things that come back not so very healthy. And you have to know what's important for the engagement. So knowing your key controls, knowing what your critical controls are, knowing what's important to each of those items, and making sure that when the responses come in and the threat intelligence is bumped up against that, that you're actually looking at things that are important. So you're not spending a whole day reviewing an assessment of everything under the sun. And then prescriptive. So extending your team, if you don't have enough, of course, building in the intelligence with recommendations. We talked about that earlier. I really, really like the fact that if an assessment comes back, it not only shows the risk, but it also shows the risk recommendation. And that is formulated and shared with the vendor, so that you don't have to manually type in your own words, different ways for every staff member of what needs to happen. So you're able to embed that information. And then also you're able to use advanced techniques within the platform to say, if the mitigation comes back as mitigated, then this item will reduce in score until verified, and it's going to take a manual person overlook to make sure that that has happened, so that it can either be removed as a risk, or it stays as medium, or even goes back up to the high risk again because it's not good enough. So those are the things that you're going to want to embed into your program, and you can't do that with Excel spreadsheets in your email. You'll have to have a portal for that. Polling question number 5. And she has not popped on, so I will read it to you. Does your, AKA DOOR, company have a reporting mechanism that correlates questionnaire responses, and threat intelligence to link risk?
Sorry about that. Fully thought I was on camera and I'm talking to nobody. All right, another question while we're looking for answers for this poll: can these risks be identified, provided by regulatory guidance, examiners, etc., and ultimately queried against portions of the supplier vendor environment?
In the future, that's going to be automated, yes. In the now term, what we do is we take that information and we can create risks after review of it. Normally, I recommend look at the summary report within that document that you get. Some practices go through the document holistically, but do create risks. And sometimes you can map those up completely against your responses, so that you can have one risk versus 2, where it's one for the survey and one for the document. Hope that answers your question. And the answer is no. So there is no reporting mechanism for at least almost 50%. And the rest are yes, good for you, and the I'm not sure, completely understand. All right, good to know. Okay. Very good to know. And we are getting to the end of our presentation where there's only 2 minutes left. So I don't want to speed through this. However, I don't want to keep you over. So our reporting strategies for compliance. Make sure your content is mapped to regulatory compliance items so that you can slice and dice the data and view it by whatever department you are. Have an information and intelligence area where the visibility can be seen by each department. So if I want to look at it from my lens or someone else's, I can. And if I want to reduce the risk or raise the risk, I also can. And then reduce the surveys and increase the response rate by having a risk-focused information gathering capability so that it's not in the questionnaires where you're putting them in email. You've got them somewhere where you can slice and dice the data and share that with the enterprise. Don't be afraid to show what you have with other companies. Go ahead, Amanda.
I'm actually just gonna put up our last poll question while we're almost done here. Feel free to fill it out and we will reach out to you if your answer is yes, but wanted to share it while you continue. So go, oh, actually there's one more question. Can you tell us how you were rated by Gartner and Forrester? Well, I can actually take that off.
Here we go.
But yeah, we can talk about it like that. Yeah, exactly.
So as you can see on the screen right now, we are a leader in 2020 for Gartner. We're highlighted in the little red circle there. We are very proudful about being moved from the visionary to the leader space, and we're continuing to climb. So there are definitely things that we can do in the Gartner space with you. We're innovative. We have trust with many large companies and small companies as well. We're ingrained in the HISAC and the legal networks. And we are very forward thinking when it comes to COVID situations, SolarWinds situations, and else to help those networks to know who's been impacted. We like to partner with our people. And talking about people, we're great to work with. We love to work with people that want to partner and make things better from a perspective of how do I do this faster? How do I get the most accurate information? What's going to be good for me? If I don't have the staff, if I do have the staff, we're here to help. So hopefully this was something that was fun for you and interactive, and we're 1 minute over. So I'll hand it back to you, Amanda.
Yeah, it looks like that's it for Q&A too, unless anyone has anything else they want to add. You can also feel free to reach out to us directly and also at info, I think at prevalent.net. You can also reach out to us that way. But other than that, thank you so much all for attending. I hope you all found it insightful. It'll be in your inbox tomorrow to share and view again. That's all. Oh, there's one more question. Oh, just kidding. It says thank you. You tricked me. You got me. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.